The day I collapsed in the parking garage at work, I had been awake for 31 hours straight. I remember the fluorescent light above Bay 4 flickering the way it always did, and I remember thinking I needed to call the maintenance line about it before my shift ended. I remember the squeal of tires somewhere on level 2, and then I remember nothing. When I opened my eyes, the ceiling above me was different, whiter, quieter, and there was a tube taped to the back of my left hand. The nurse beside me, a woman named Deborah with reading glasses pushed up into her hair, told me I had been brought in by ambulance. She told me my blood pressure had bottomed out, that I had a mild concussion from hitting the concrete, and that I had been unconscious for nearly 4 hours. She said it in the calm, practiced tone that healthcare workers use when they want you to understand something is serious without causing you to panic. I was 32 years old. I was a senior financial analyst at a mid-sized logistics company in Charlotte. I had not taken a vacation day in 14 months. I was sending home $3,500 every month to my parents in Columbus, and I had been telling myself for 2 years that things were going to slow down soon. They were not going to slow down soon. Deborah asked if there was someone she should call. I gave her my mother's number, because that is what you do. That is what I had always done. You call your mother. My mother called back 11 minutes later. I know because I was watching the clock on the wall above the door, the way you do, when you are lying in a hospital bed, with nothing to do but wait, and think. She did not ask how I was. She asked if it was serious enough that she would need to cancel. I said, "Cancel what?" She said my brother Derek's grand opening was that weekend. His restaurant. The one I had wired $42,000 toward over the past 18 months, not counting the $12,000 before that for culinary school, not counting the $8,000 for the equipment he needed to replace after the first kitchen space fell through. The grand opening was in Savannah on Saturday, which was 3 days away, and the whole family was already planning to drive down together. My parents, my Aunt Linda, my father's brother and his wife, Derek's girlfriend's family, a whole convoy. I said, "Mom, I'm in the emergency room." She said, "I know that, sweetheart. That's why I'm asking if it's serious." I looked at the IV in my hand. I looked at the monitor showing my heart rate. I said I didn't know yet, that the doctor hadn't come in, that they were still running tests. There was a pause. Then she said, "Well, keep us posted." She hung up. The doctor came in an hour later. His name was Dr. Okafor, and he had kind eyes and the tired handshake of someone who has delivered difficult news so many times that he has developed a specific economy of motion around it. He sat down, which I had learned meant he was going to take his time. He told me my collapse was the result of severe exhaustion combined with what appeared to be an undiagnosed cardiac arrhythmia. He wanted to keep me for observation for at least 48 hours. He wanted a cardiologist to review my results. He said the words not immediately life-threatening in the same sentence as, "But we need to understand what's happening before we let you leave." I texted my mother everything he told me. She responded with a thumbs-up emoji, and then, 2 minutes later, a separate message that said, "We'll try to stop by on the way back from Savannah if we can make the timing work." On the way back, I put my phone face down on the blanket, and I stared at the ceiling for a long time. My coworker Priya was the one who showed up that first evening. She had been in the parking garage when the ambulance came. She had ridden with me, apparently, though I had no memory of that. She arrived at my room around 7 with a tote bag containing a phone charger, a change of clothes she had grabbed from my apartment with my spare key, a container of soup from the Thai place 2 blocks from our office, and a fury so quiet and controlled, it was almost more frightening than the loud kind. She sat in the chair beside my bed, and watched me eat, and did not say anything about my family until I brought it up. When I did, she just nodded slowly, the way you nod when something confirms what you already suspected. "You know you almost died in that parking lot," she said. "I didn't almost die. Rachel." She said my name, the way a person says it when they want you to actually hear it. "You were unresponsive for 4 hours. Your heart did something it was not supposed to do. You hit concrete." She paused. "They're going to a restaurant opening." I did not have anything to say to that. She stayed until visiting hours ended. The next 2 days passed in the specific suspended way that hospital time passes. Tests in the morning, waiting in the afternoon. The cardiologist, a doctor, Huang, who spoke very fast and used her hands a lot, confirmed I had a condition called supraventricular tachycardia, manageable with medication and, critically, with a reduction in chronic stress. She said the word reduction several times. She also said the word serious. She was not gentle about combining them. My father called on the second day. He called from the parking lot of the restaurant. I could hear the noise of a crowd in the background. He asked how I was doing. I told him what Dr. Huang had said. He said that sounded rough, and that he hoped I felt better soon. He said Derek's opening had gone really well, and that the food was incredible, really incredible. He said I would have loved it. Then someone called his name in the background, and he said he had to go. I said, okay. He said, take care of yourself, sweetheart. He hung up. I lay there for a while after that call. And I realized something was happening in my chest that had nothing to do with arrhythmia. It was something older. Something I had been pressing down for so long that I had genuinely forgotten it was there, the way you stop noticing a sound when you've been hearing it your whole life. It was grief. Not sadness, grief. The specific kind that comes when you understand, really understand in a way you cannot ununderstand, that the thing you have been hoping for is not coming. They were not going to show up. Not that day, not in some better version of that day I had been imagining since I was a teenager. My parents were not going to walk through that door and take my hand and tell me I mattered more than a restaurant opening. That version of events did not exist. On the morning of the third day, a Saturday, a nurse I hadn't seen before came in to update my chart. She was young, maybe 24, and she made small talk while she checked my IV line. She mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that I'd had a visitor the night before. Late. Around 11:30. I told her she must have the wrong room. She checked the board. She said no, it was this room, room 214. She said the visitor had signed in at the front desk, that it was after standard hours, but that the floor supervisor had allowed it, given the circumstances. She said the visitor had sat with me for about 40 minutes while I was asleep. She seemed to think I knew about this. I had been alone every night I had been there. Or I had thought I had. I asked her what name was on the sign-in sheet. She said she'd have to check with the front desk about that. She didn't have that information personally. I don't know why it hit me so hard, that piece of information. I was exhausted and medicated, and my heart had spent the last 72 hours being monitored by machines. But something about the idea of a person sitting beside me while I slept, a person I couldn't account for, settled into my mind and would not leave. I pressed the call button and asked the aide who answered if someone could bring me the visitor log for my room. It took about 20 minutes. The floor coordinator, a calm, efficient woman named Gail, brought it herself. She set it on the rolling tray beside my bed and told me I was entitled to see who had signed in to visit me. There were 3 entries. Priya's name, twice Thursday evening and Friday evening, and then a third name, for Friday night at 11:47 p.m., the name was Thomas Calloway. I read it 3 times. I did not know anyone named Thomas Calloway. I was completely certain I did not know anyone named Thomas Calloway. I turned the sheet over as if there might be an explanation on the back. There wasn't. Gail was still standing near the door. I asked her if she could describe the visitor from Friday night, the late one. She hesitated, then said she hadn't been on shift but that the note in the system said the visitor was a male, older, had asked specifically for room 214, and had been calm and quiet the entire time. No disruption. She said the supervisor on duty had used the word composed. I asked if he had left anything. Gail paused. She went to the small closet where they had stored the personal items from my bag, items they'd separated out during triage. She reached to the back of the shelf and pulled out a white letter-sized envelope. She said it had been in the tray beside my bed when the morning shift arrived. She had assumed it was from a family member. My name was written on the front in careful, even handwriting I did not recognize. She left me alone with it. I held it for probably 5 minutes before I opened it. Inside were two things. The first was a handwritten letter, 2 pages, front and back, in the same careful handwriting as the envelope. The second was a document I recognized immediately from the type of work I had done for 3 months at an estate law firm during a contract job 6 years earlier. It was an adoption certificate. My adoption certificate, my full name, my date of birth. The names of the adoptive parents listed were my parents, my mother and father, their names in black ink exactly as I knew them. And in the space for birth parents, 2 names I had never seen in my life. I read the letter 3 times before I understood it. Thomas Calloway was 58 years old. He lived in Asheville, 90 minutes from Charlotte. He had been married briefly at 24 to a woman named Dara, and they had been young and broke and frightened, and when Dara became pregnant, the adoption counselor had told them it was the loving choice. Thomas had believed that. He had spent the next 32 years believing it, and grieving it, and trying to find a way to live with it. He had found me 4 years ago through a DNA registry. He had spent 4 years trying to decide whether to make contact, terrified of disrupting my life, terrified of being rejected, terrified of doing more harm than the harm he already carried. He had written 8 different letters and thrown them all away. Then someone he knew worked in the hospital system and had seen my name in the intake records and had called him. And he had gotten in his car and driven 90 minutes and sat beside me in the dark for 40 minutes while I slept, because he could not make himself stay away and could not make himself wake me up. He wrote, "I don't know if you want to know me. I don't have the right to ask for anything. But I needed you to know that someone was there. Someone who came running the moment they heard." He had left his phone number. I put the letter down on the blanket in front of me. Outside my window, Charlotte was doing what Charlotte does on a Saturday morning. Cars, birds, the distant sound of something being delivered. I thought about my mother's thumbs up emoji. I thought about my father's voice in that parking lot noise. I thought about Derek's $42,000 in culinary school and the $8,000 for the replacement equipment. I thought about $3,500 a month after month, while I ate granola bars for lunch at my desk and told myself I'd take a vacation next year. And then I thought about a man driving 90 minutes in the middle of the night to sit beside a daughter he had never spoken to because he could not make himself stay away. I picked up my phone. I called my mother. She answered on the 4th ring. I could hear the sounds of a meal somewhere behind her. Glasses, conversation, someone laughing. They were still in Savannah. I told her I had been diagnosed with a cardiac condition. I told her I had been alone in that hospital for 3 days. I told her that the only person who had come when it mattered was a coworker. She said she knew it must have been hard, and that they had really wanted to come sooner, but the timing had just been impossible with everything going on. I said, "I need you to tell me something." Something in my voice must have changed, because she went quiet. I said, "Am I adopted?" 4 seconds of silence. I counted them. She said, "Where is this coming from?" I said, "Answer the question." She said it was complicated, that it wasn't something she had wanted me to find out like this, that they had always meant to tell me, but the right time had never seemed to come, and then too much time had passed. I said, "So yes." She said, "We are your real parents, Rachel. We raised you. That's what makes someone real." I said, "You didn't come." She said, "What?" I said it again. "You didn't come." I was in the hospital. My heart was doing something wrong, and you did not come. I kept my voice level. I had not planned this conversation, and I was not performing anything. I was just very, very tired, and something had clarified. Derek's restaurant is more important than me. It always has been. I've known that for a long time, and I kept finding reasons to explain it differently, but there are no more explanations. She started to say something about how unfair I was being, about everything they had done for me, about how hard she and my father had worked. I said, "I'm going to need some time." She said, "Rachel." I said, "I'll call you when I'm ready." I ended the call. Then I sat there for a moment, and I was surprised to find that my hands were not shaking. I picked up the letter from Thomas Calloway. I read his phone number at the bottom, I looked at it for a long time. I typed it into my phone. I opened a new message. I wrote, "My name is Rachel. I got your letter. I don't know what any of this means yet, or what I want it to mean. But I wanted you to know I read it." I pressed send. His response came back in under 2 minutes. It said, "Thank you. That's more than I deserve. I'll be here whenever you're ready, if you ever are. No pressure, no expectations. I just needed you to know." I set the phone down. Outside the window, the morning had gotten brighter. Dr. Huang came in at 10 to go over discharge paperwork. She reviewed my medications, the beta blocker, the instructions about monitoring my heart rate, the very clear directive to reduce my chronic stress load. Or, she would be seeing me again under less controlled circumstances. She was not making idle conversation. She said the words, lifestyle, change the way a person says them, when they mean or else. I told her I understood. Priya came to pick me up at noon. She arrived with my overnight bag already packed from my apartment, and a coffee from the place I liked, and absolutely zero questions about why I looked like someone who had been quietly reorganizing the architecture of her entire life. In the car, about 10 minutes into the drive, she glanced over at me and said, "You okay?" I said, "I think I'm going to be." She nodded like that was the right answer. She turned the radio up slightly, and we drove. That first week home was strange. It had the quality of those first days after a fever breaks, when everything is slightly too crisp and real, when you notice things you stopped noticing. I noticed how quiet my apartment was. I noticed that the plants on my windowsill, which I had owned for 2 years, had names I had never given them. I noticed that my refrigerator contained almost nothing that required cooking, because I had not cooked a real meal in months. I took my medication. I went to my follow-up appointment with Dr. Huang, who said my numbers were better, and looked at me in a way that communicated she was reserving judgment. I went back to work on a modified schedule that my manager, a man named Gerald, who I had always slightly underestimated, had arranged without being asked. He had sent flowers to the hospital. I hadn't known that until I came back and found the card on my desk. I did not call my parents. I did not call Derek. My mother called me 4 times in the first 2 weeks. I let them go to voicemail. The messages were variations of the same thing, that they were worried about me, that they hoped I was feeling better, that they wanted to talk. The 4th message mentioned money. There was a plumbing situation at the house in Columbus, she said. She mentioned a number. She mentioned that Derek's restaurant was doing well, but that the first few months were always slow, and she just didn't know how they were going to manage. I listened to all 4 messages. I did not call back. 3 weeks after I was discharged, I met Thomas Calloway for the first time. We met at a coffee shop in Asheville, at a corner table by the window, because I had said I wanted somewhere I could leave easily if I needed to, and he had said that was completely reasonable. He was already there when I arrived, sitting with his hands around a cup of coffee he had barely touched, wearing a dark blue jacket and the particular posture of someone trying very hard not to want too much. He was not what I had pictured. I don't know what I had pictured exactly. He was tall and a little rumpled, and he had gray at his temples, and reading glasses hanging from his shirt collar, and when he saw me come through the door, he went very still in the way that some people go still when they are trying to hold something in. We shook hands. Then he laughed a little, a short, helpless laugh, and said that felt absurd, and I said it kind of did, and we sat down. We talked for almost 3 hours. He told me about his life, a structural engineer, 2 grown stepchildren from a long marriage that had ended amicably 8 years ago, a house in the hills with a garden he was bad at maintaining. He talked about Dara, my birth mother, who had passed away from cancer 6 years ago and who, he said, had never stopped thinking about me. He showed me a photo on his phone, a woman with dark eyes and a wide smile, photographed in front of a yellow door somewhere sunny. She looked like me in a way that was almost disorienting. I told him about my life, probably more than I had intended to, but he listened the way that people listen when they have been waiting a very long time and are not going to waste it. At some point I told him about the hospital, about my parents leaving for the opening. About the letter arriving and what it had clarified. He was quiet for a moment after that. Then he said, I want to be very careful about how I say this, because I don't want it to sound like I'm criticizing people you love. I said, say it. He said, you have been taking care of everyone around you for a very long time, and the people around you let you, because it was convenient for them to let you. That's not love. That might have been love once, at the beginning, but it became something else. He paused. You deserved better. No one had ever said that to me so plainly. No preamble, no qualifications. No, I'm sure they meant well. I looked out the window for a moment. Then I said, I know. And that, I think, was the moment things actually shifted. Not the hospital. Not the letter. Not even the conversation with my mother. But sitting in a coffee shop in Asheville across from a man I had known for 3 hours, hearing words I had known were true for years and had never once let myself say out loud. I know. The month that followed was not dramatic. There were no scenes, no confrontations, no satisfying moment where everything collapsed at once and could be rebuilt clean. Life is not structured that way, and I had learned to be suspicious of anything that felt too neat. I had a conversation with my mother on a Sunday afternoon, a real one, not a voicemail. I told her I was not going to continue sending money every month. I told her I had a medical condition that required me to take my own well-being seriously, and that I had been failing to do that for a long time. I was not unkind. I did not yell. I said what I meant clearly, and let the silence happen when it happened. She said things that were difficult to hear. She said I was being selfish. She said she and my father had given up everything for me. She said Derek was family, and family helped each other. I let her finish. Then I said, I love you, but I'm done. She said, done with what? I said, with being what's convenient. She hung up. My father called an hour later and left a voicemail asking me to call my mother back, that she was upset. I listened to it twice. I did not call. I continued not calling for a long time. I started seeing a therapist, a woman named Dr. Fenwick, who had a very direct manner and a slight disdain for what she called productive suffering. She had no patience for my habit of finding elaborate reasons why other people's choices were actually my fault. We worked on that. Thomas and I texted most days. Small things at first. He sent photos of his garden correctly. It was struggling. There were some very demoralized tomato plants, and I sent photos of things I noticed on my lunch walks in Charlotte. We talked on the phone every Sunday evening, and at first those calls were 30 minutes, and then they were an hour, and then sometimes they were 2 hours, and neither of us noticed until it was suddenly 10:30 at night. He had a sister, it turned out. Patricia. She was 53 and lived in Raleigh and worked in public health and had, when Thomas told her about me, sent him a text that said only, finally, introduce us. I liked her immediately on that basis alone. Priya and I started cooking dinner together on Thursdays. It was her idea. She showed up one evening with groceries and the stated intention of teaching me to make her mother's doll, and we made a mess of her kitchen, and the doll was not quite right but was good enough, and we did it the next week, and the week after that. Her husband joined sometimes. Her daughter, who was 6 and very opinionated about pasta shapes, joined sometimes. I took a vacation day, 1 at first, then 3 in a row, which felt almost irresponsible and was the best I had felt in years. My heart, Dr. Huang told me at my 3-month follow-up, was doing much better. I thought about that a lot. Both the literal and the other kind. The last time I heard from Derek was a voicemail in November. He said the restaurant had hit some financial trouble. He said it the way people say things, when they have rehearsed the soft version, and that he was hoping I might be in a position to help out. He said he hoped I was feeling better. He said the family missed me. I listened to the voicemail. I put my phone in my pocket, and I went for a walk around the park near my apartment, and I watched the kids on the climbing structure, and a man trying to teach his dog to fetch who was having very limited success, and I thought about the 32 years that had passed without my knowing something that turned out to matter enormously. I thought about a man driving 90 minutes in the middle of the night, I thought about a woman named Dara in front of a yellow door, who had never stopped thinking about me. I thought about all the years I had spent trying to earn something that was never going to be given, the way you stand at a vending machine, pressing the same button over and over, because you cannot believe that what you paid for is simply not going to come out. And I thought about what it had felt like to finally walk away from the machine. I did not call Derek back. I walked home. I texted Thomas to confirm Sunday's call. I made dinner, actually made it. Pasta with vegetables. A thing I had been eating since Priya taught me, and had found I genuinely enjoyed. I ate it at my kitchen table, which I had been eating at instead of over my keyboard for 2 months now, and the evening light came through the window at the angle it always came at this time of year, and it was very quiet. It was the good kind of quiet. The kind that is not empty. I was 32 years old. I had a heart condition that required me to take care of myself. I had a coworker who had ridden in an ambulance for me without being asked. I had a therapist who thought productive suffering was a waste of everyone's time. I had a father I had known for 4 months, who sent me photos of his failing tomato garden and called me every Sunday and said I deserved better with the plain confidence of someone who had been waiting 32 years to say it. None of that was the life I had been managing toward. It was smaller in some ways, and louder in others, and it did not require me to disappear. I thought I could work with that,